I live in an apartment building that's right across the street from a McDonald's. More than a few times since living here, I've wandered across the street late at night to get something, but one of those times led to a very scary encounter for me. It was a pretty typical night. I often work late and I'm also a night owl. So I was at my apartment, and at about midnight I left and walked across the street to the McDonald's. There is the apartment complex and then the street, which can get busy during the day, and then the McDonald's right across it. However, at this time of night the street was dead quiet. I walked across it and then went inside McDonald's. There was nobody else inside when I got there. I ordered, eventually got the food pretty quick, and then started walking back. I was gone from my apartment for probably less than 10 minutes. When I arrived back to the door I usually enter through, I noticed a woman standing out front. I hadn't seen her before, but thought that maybe she lived in the building. Either that or she was maybe visiting someone. When I got closer, she looked at me and asked if I could let her inside. I didn't think much of it and said sure. I didn't even ask her why, but I didn't feel the need to. She didn't seem sketchy to me, so I went inside and she followed me in. Then I started walking through the hallways to my place, which was down a couple of hallways but still on the first floor. The lady started walking behind me the entire ways. When I got to my place, she was still there. Then she stopped at my door behind me as if she was going to go into my place. I asked her, "What are you doing?" She said that I said I would let her in. I said to the building, not my actual apartment. The woman said that she needed a place to stay and she thought that I said I would let her in. I said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The woman interrupted me and said, "Are you going to let me in or not?" I said not. I quickly went inside and then locked the door behind me. The woman was still standing there right on the other side of the door. Then she knocked on it. I yelled at her to go away. I looked out as she finally stormed off. I thought that she was gone for good, but she was not. About 5 minutes later, I heard more knocking at my door. I figured that the lady was back, but I went to the door to look. She was, but this time she had this big-looking guy with her. He looked angry, and he was now banging on my door as well. I yelled at them to leave. They did not. Instead, they both started banging on my door loudly and yelling at me. They were cursing and telling me to open the door. I was afraid that they might succeed in breaking the door down. Soon, I heard a couple of other people's doors open down the hallway. People were no doubt angry from all the noise. At first, this did not seem to stop the angry man and woman. I heard a few neighbors tell them to quiet down though. They ignored it for a while. They banged on the door some more and yelled for maybe 5 minutes. Then they finally stopped and angrily left. I was obviously afraid that they would come back again, but they didn't. I still don't know why on earth that woman thought that I would let her into my apartment. And who was the guy? I figured that she must have let him in the apartment building given the fact that she was already inside. But it still blows my mind how crazy of a situation that was. I didn't go out late at night for a while after that.
I live in a managed complex that has 2 buildings. The main one with the lobby, mailroom, amenities, etc., and the secondary one, which I currently live in. On Sunday night, I had a DoorDash delivery dropped off. I always tell them they can drop off my orders at the secondary entrance in my building so that I don't have to cross over to the main building, but I don't think they've ever actually read that note. No worries. I read the notifications from DoorDash, and I saw it got delivered to the lobby in the main building around 11 p.m. I made my way over, and I noticed my dasher even left a note saying there was a suspicious man in the lobby and that he was worried that he might take my food. I figured he said this because he was waiting until I got there. When I came down, there really was a guy sitting there on his phone, but carefully watching my food. He saw me approaching and then just said, "You're here." To which I just responded, "Thanks for waiting. Must be the DoorDasher." I picked up my order and started to turn around, and he also got up, except he had started heading in the direction of the elevators, not the exit. He starts chatting.
"I actually live in this building. My name is Tom, and I live in the building number 205. What's your name?"
I give him a fake name and cut the conversation short, the pieces coming together in my mind. This wasn't the DoorDasher. It was the suspicious man pretending to be the DoorDasher, and who had even waited for me to come down as though he made the delivery. To get back to my building, you can either use the elevators in the main building to the 4th floor and transfer to the secondary building, or you can cut across the garage in the main building to the 2nd building. I noticed the key fob in his hand and waited for him to click the elevator and step inside. When I gathered he was taking the elevator, and I knew I definitely didn't want to share an elevator with him so that he knew where I lived, I decided I would take the shortcut through the garage. It's a straight line and maybe a 2-minute walk to the other side. After he stepped in the elevator, I walked through both sets of doors and into the garage, my senses heightened. Halfway through, I decided to look behind me to verify I was alone, only to see his body in the doorway. He hadn't taken the elevator. He was following me. I booked it, heart racing through the garage doors. I started jamming the elevator buttons, hoping it would come quickly, but I could hear the elevator car was still on its way down. In a split second, I tried to think if I would be strong enough to hold down the door with the weight of my body if he came pushing through, but that would mean we would be stuck in this area in the garage with probably little to no cameras, witnesses, or any cell service. I was running out of time. I eyed the stairwell and, carrying my food, booked it 2 steps at a time up 2 floors. I was now on the 4th floor, which is normally the floor you would transfer on to get to the other building. Although I was now in the secondary building, which is my building, I was worried if he indeed was still following me, he'd know which building I lived in. I needed to go back to the main building. If he was still behind me, I would know for sure he was following me, because we just did a circle. From the corner of my eye in the distance, I could see someone taking out their trash from the reflection of the door. At 11 p.m., this was the first person I'd seen, and I needed to be next to anyone. I cut through the courtyard, through the conservatory, and into the hallway of the 4th floor in the main building. Just as I stopped to catch my breath, he burst through the conservatory doors and caught up to me, huffing and puffing. He accused me of stealing the DoorDash, yelling, got in my face, and told me I could be evicted and sent to prison. I couldn't look him in the eyes for longer than like 3 seconds, but he looked bewildered. At this point, the person taking out their trash to the chute was nowhere to be seen, and this man kept coming closer, me backing up, him inching closer. I tried talking loudly, hoping if anything were to happen, the residents in the unit behind me could hear. He continued to raise his voice, claiming that the 119 number on the receipt stapled outside of the bag was the real person's apartment number, and that I had stolen it from them. Taking a look, number 119 was in fact the order number, not the apartment number, but he was convinced it was someone's apartment unit number. For a whole lot of reasons, this logic didn't make any sense, but this implied not that I needed to explain it to him, but I could have been trying to go from the main building, 2nd building, 4th floor, main building, and then 2nd floor to lose him, so that we didn't have to share the elevator and he'd know where I lived. Even if I was taking someone else's order, I wasn't. He was going to follow me to my apartment to verify where I lived and ensure my apartment matched the number on the bag. He was able to catch up to me relatively quickly, considering I was sprinting and out of breath. This means he was deliberately following and chasing me down, which is a man's circumstances aside, but especially for the rationale of stolen food, I'm not sure why you would ever willingly chase a woman by herself at night, knowing how this would look for him. He was studying my order and receipt, because you had to be in close proximity to the receipt to see that the fading ink read 119. It was never about the order, because why did he pretend to go on the elevator in the beginning, only to chase me across 2 buildings for an order he didn't even know what apartment number I was going into? And it definitely dawned on him that up until that point, we were the only people around. As I was standing there, him inching near me and poking the receipt, I thought that I had heard someone coming through the hallway in the distance. He clicked the elevator button, continuing his threats, and I didn't even wait for him to finish getting on the elevator. I sprinted through the conservatory, through the courtyard, and back to my building, taking the elevator up to my floor. I got to my apartment paralyzed and shaking from what I thought was the end that night. I was so terrified that my breathing got labored and raspy. I don't even have asthma, but I could barely catch my breath for minutes, grasping onto anything I could so that I could feel grounded and not choke from the lack of air. I'll never forget the moment I looked into the garage and saw his body in the doorframe. I wrote a long, detailed email to my management with screenshots from the DoorDash and exact accounts and locations of where everything happened so they could corroborate my account with their camera footage. It's now been 4 days, and I'm awoken every morning by my heart racing, hot flashes, and paranoia with every drop of a sound. This is a new kind of anxiety that I've never felt before, and my days are clouded with fear of bumping into him in common spaces, how to plan my days with the highest likelihood of avoiding him, and how to strategically order and pick up my mail where I can know I won't have to see him. I don't know if these extreme symptoms, especially the heart racing, are normal after this experience, considering I know a lot of women who have had way more frightening, violent encounters with strangers that involve more than what happened to me that night. But this has really been consuming me for the past few days. I really feel unsafe in my own building. Update. This is everything that has happened since the next morning. My management and maintenance, which is 2 men, came knocking on my door. Of course, I was already pretty frazzled from the events of the night before, and although I opened the door, they could see I was visibly shaking. They came to apologize about the events, saying they had seen the footage and that it was scary. I needed to file a police report immediately. The property manager was kind, saying he would sit and call the police with me so that I wouldn't have to do it alone. I asked if they knew this resident and if they were aware. He said they knew who he was, and this actually wasn't the first time he had been reported for bothering a resident. My stomach sank. I quickly got ready and met the property manager downstairs outside our building, but away from areas my property manager has been known to see him hanging near, and we made the call together. After I gave my account, the property manager chimed in with his accounts of what happened too. I was the 4th or 5th female that he has harassed. He's harassed women in the complex before, but never followed them at night. The property manager has managed multiple properties before, but he's never seen a resident following another resident like this before. He usually finds a woman by herself and kind of hones in on them. He doesn't approach men, and he doesn't approach women when they're with men. The people who live on his floor have complained numerous times that he harasses them, making it bothersome for them. He's also been arrested before for harassing a woman. He's been sent to the hospital before for his mental health issues. He was most recently booked and released 2 weeks ago, and management wasn't aware he was back. The responder on the other line noticed this was quite severe, so they sent out an officer on the scene to collect an official report. By this point as we were talking, I learned the resident's full name, birthday, unit number that he lives in, and when he moved in. It's been less than half a year, so assuming he has a 12-month lease, he still has a ways to go. The officer asked if I could remember if he had a tool or weapon in his hands, but I said that I couldn't remember, not that I knew. I said there was camera footage, so couldn't we check and see if he did? But the officer said even if I couldn't remember and it turns out the perpetrator did in fact have a weapon, I can't go back on my word and say there was a weapon or if I felt threatened. I was stunned. I told the officer, but there's evidence of him following me, a woman alone, as well as threatening me across 2 buildings, one of which he had no business being in at 11 p.m. at night. The officer literally asked me if he used the words, "I will kill you or I will shoot you." I said no, but that he was still threatening me. The officer said unfortunately that only qualifies as being a nuisance, but being a nuisance isn't against the law / grounds for arrest. My heart dropped. On top of that, my property manager said they'd been trying to evict him, but there isn't enough evidence, and eviction is a long process. There was nothing they could do. The officer gave me his card with my case number, informing me that I should call him if he ever approached me again or if I felt unsafe. I went back to my apartment, stunned and just trying to figure out the next steps. I decided not to leave my apartment again out of safety, but ordered additional self-defense items, including an apartment doorbell camera, because he had been up close to my receipt bag to know my order number. The receipt also had my name on it. I was worried he would put 2 and 2 together and type my name in the directory outside our building and figure out my unit number. I couldn't risk running into him again, so I had to stay locked up until my camera arrived. Given the information I had about him now, full name, birthday, and the fact that he has a prior record related to harassment, I decided to do my own research and find his public records. To my surprise, I learned that he actually has 6 court cases since 2018, and the most recent court record was from August 2024. His cases have been for stalking, harassment, restraining orders, multiple reissued anti-harassment protection orders, domestic violence, and attempting to get him to surrender his firearms, to which he has refused, so he still owns his guns. Different women have attempted to serve him protection orders multiple times, but failed either because he's tried to dodge it, never showed up to court, or he's been hard to get a hold of. I just couldn't believe it. This man was able to freely move about common spaces in our complex, and management has never mentioned anything to residents nor regarded our safety. Now I knew this was more than just an annoying neighbor, but rather someone who could be dangerous. I was dealing with a man with unresolved mental health issues, who may still be in possession of his multiple firearms, who was angry with me. Given his history of professional stalking, I was worried if he saw me too soon again, he would remember our encounter and fixate on me, and possibly escalate. A few days passed and I hadn't left my building, but I noted that my camera had arrived, so I was trying to arrange for how I could go into the mailroom, which is in the building he lives in and the floor he's on. I asked management for footage of our encounter, and after 2 days of dragging on the request, it seemed like they were trying to buy time. They finally sent me clips of our encounters in different areas. In one of the videos, you could see that he followed me into the garage a bit after I'd already gone in after he had supposedly pretended to take the elevator. And the clip that freaks me out the most, you could see me enter the garage elevator lobby, click the elevator button, frantically pace back and forth, and try leaning my body against the door before I realize I'm running out of time and run through the stairwell. A few moments later, you see him come in, look at the press elevator button, but no one took it. Then deduce I must have taken the stairwell before following suit. If anything, this showed intent. Oddly enough, the footage when he caught up to me and poked the receipt on my bag was missing, but management sent the footage after I ran back to my building. Anyway, a few days later around 6 p.m., I was trying to figure out how to pick up my mail. I have a married friend who lives in his building 3 floors above and had no idea about any of this, so I asked if she would be comfortable meeting me on the 4th floor of her building, which is where the encounter took place, but where I have to pass in order to go to the mailroom in the main lobby. Deep breaths. I got to the end of the hallway, my friend on the phone the whole time, and opened the door to the courtyard. Hypervigilantly, I looked across the conservatory and saw a man there. I squinted. It couldn't be. It was indeed him standing in the conservatory. He locked eyes with me, started mouthing things, smiling, and then yelling. I began shaking, uncontrollably crying, and then quickly ran back into my building. Now he knew for sure I lived in the second building. My friend was in the hallway behind him, so she witnessed everything as he was yelling and directed at me. She wasn't with her husband either, but he had locked eyes with me and was angry now. There were some people in the hallway frantically asking if I was okay, but I couldn't speak. My friend still on the line told me to go back into my apartment and that she would meet me there with her husband. My friend and her husband came up a few moments later, staying with me as I frantically packed a go bag. We decided it wasn't safe for me to be alone in my apartment, so I reached out to another friend who lives elsewhere in the city and said I could crash at her place. My friend and her husband escorted me through the hallway, me physically breaking down as we neared the elevators, but eventually leading me to my other friend's car. As I write this update, I'm in the living room of her apartment for the 3rd day, figuring out my next moves. On my first day at my friend's house, I wrote management an email explaining the incident with the resident again. This is my 2nd day and still no response from them. My friend went to management with her husband to report the incident since she also witnessed him yelling so it could add to their complaints. She said management was aware of me and my complaints, but they can't do anything because he's protected under the Fair Housing Act. Management cannot deny housing to someone due to their disability, which includes mental illness. For context, most buildings in my city have MFTE units, basically reduced rent apartments that are reserved as part of an affordable housing program in my city. From what I understand, people can qualify for MFTE housing based on income, and sometimes it's combined with disability protections, which is likely how he's able to stay here. So it seems my unit is worried if they evict him, he might be able to sue for discriminatory eviction. I don't have a male partner, which seems to be the only deterrent from the resident. So my sister and her husband are trying to figure out when they can fly in and help me pack my place so I can get out of here. I'm pretty devastated because it's a really beautiful complex with incredible amenities, gorgeous interior, and pretty new. But all this means nothing when my safety's at risk. I have no plans, but I cannot go back to my unit until I have protection at all times in that building.
One of the creepiest events of my life took place several years ago. For some brief background, I live by myself in a house, and I live in a pretty average neighborhood. It's a suburb of the city, and there are a ton of houses on a quiet street. The local shopping area pretty close to my neighborhood has many of the typical stores. The largest one there is probably the Walmart, and that's where I was on the night of this story. So I went there, and it was nighttime, but not that late. It was probably like 8 o'clock or so. I parked my car and went inside to get a decent amount of things. I took a shopping cart and began to walk around the store. When I was inside the Walmart, I went to just about every part of it. The store was really not that busy, but there were still people there. I remember that when I was inside, I kept seeing this one man, and I didn't think that he was following me or anything, but I just kept seeing him. I couldn't tell you the very first time that I saw him, but it was probably not too long after I entered the store. As I was walking down an aisle, I noticed him again, but I didn't even really think anything of it. But I remember that the guy was pretty tall and kind of lean. He just kind of stood out. I don't want to say that he looked creepy or something like that, but something sort of seemed off about him. I know that might seem like I'm just exaggerating for the story, but I really did think that. The guy had dark hair and wore a maroon sweater and dark jeans. I saw him another time when I was on the complete opposite end of the store. Still, I thought nothing strange of it. It wasn't like he was ever staring at me or creepily looking in my direction. It just seemed like he was shopping like everybody else. To me, it seemed like more of a coincidence than anything. And I saw him yet another time after that. So it was like 4 or 5 total times when I was shopping in completely different areas in the store when I saw the guy. By the last time, I found it strange. But still, I wasn't thinking that he was following me or something crazy like that. By the time I checked out, I didn't know where he was. I had never paid attention to if he had any items in his hands or anything. I know that he didn't have a shopping cart, but I didn't know if he got anything at all, and I did not see him at the checkouts. So after I was done shopping, I pretty much forgot all about the guy. I left the store and walked out to my car and then put the groceries inside. Then I got in my car, drove back home, which was pretty close like I mentioned before, and after arriving back home, I went inside and unpacked everything. Then, after being home for maybe 10 or 20 minutes, I remember passing by the front of my house, which is the living room. There, I noticed something out the window. There was a man just standing in the street out front. It was the same guy who I kept seeing in the Walmart. He was standing there in the street facing my house and just staring at me. It instantly gave me the chills. I could not believe that the man was here. I had never seen him before this night. He just stood there looking at me and did not move. There was really no expression on his face either. After watching him for like a minute straight, I couldn't take it anymore. I covered all the windows and moved away from them. I then went around and made sure that every door was locked and every window was shut. I tried to ignore the guy, but I had to go back and look again. When I did, he was gone. I went to every window and looked out of them, but he was nowhere in sight. I was glad that he was gone, but I was also still really creeped out by the whole thing. Looking back, I still don't know what happened there. I didn't notice him following me home from Walmart or anything, and I think that I would have noticed because the streets were pretty quiet at that hour, but I guess anything is possible. I will never forget seeing him staring at me in the window though. It was truly one of the most terrifying moments ever. For a period of time a long time ago, I used to work at McDonald's as a manager. I worked there for about a year and dealt with some crazy things, but one time is by far the craziest thing to ever happen there. It was an average evening for the most part. We got somewhat busy and I was helping with different tasks. At our McDonald's, we never had enough employees and were seemingly always short, so I did a little bit of everything. At one point though, I was in the back for a while, but I heard that someone was asking for me. Apparently there was a dispute with the customer and he asked for the manager. So I walked up to the counter and saw one of my employees looking upset and an angry man on the other side of the counter. I didn't hear any of the conversation, but I knew the employee he was dealing with was very nice. The man asked me if I was the manager and I said yes. He then told me how he was mad because the fries were cold, but he went on to insult my employee and call her stupid. He did not seem interested in resolving the matter, only in letting out his anger towards us. After he started swearing towards us employees, I yelled at the guy and told him to get out. I said we weren't doing anything and if he didn't leave now I would ban him and call the cops. He continued to yell at us and literally everybody else in the restaurant was staring at the scene. Eventually though, the guy finally walked out and left. I was glad that I didn't have to call the police on him. Then we resumed back to normal for the most part. Eventually, within about an hour, we all moved on and were feeling better. As it got later, things quieted down. I remember that at one point, I went to take out the trash. We had dumpsters in an area behind the building. So I walked over to a back door and put a few trash bags in the dumpster. As I did, I saw past the few trees next to the dumpster into the very back corner of the parking lot. There was the man standing in the shadows. He saw me and instantly started to walk over. I didn't want to fight the guy, so I just turned around and walked back inside. Those doors automatically locked, but I just hoped that the man wouldn't come back through the main doors. After I got back inside, I stayed near the doors. Within moments, I heard some loud noises from outside. The guy was doing something, but I didn't know what, so I decided to go out and see. So I walked around to the main doors and left the restaurant. I walked over to see the man. He was outside by the dumpsters, and it appeared that he had taken the trash bags out of the dumpsters and messed them all around. He had dumped them out and there was garbage everywhere. I told the man that he had to stop and leave now or I was going to call the police. Once more he started yelling and cursing at me. This guy had to be insane. He had waited for over an hour, as the last altercation was a long time ago, and he apparently was just standing in the parking lot. I kept telling him that he had to go now, but he just wouldn't. So eventually I went back inside and I called the police. I was on a mission to get him banned from our McDonald's forever. I waited inside for the police and the man did not enter the McDonald's for a while. Then, within about 5 minutes, when I thought the cops would be there any moment, the man walked back inside. This time he walked right over to me. I told him that I already called the cops. He claimed that he didn't care, and he just stood there looking at me. I didn't know what he wanted now. I just hoped that he didn't want to fight me or something like that. I stood there and he stared at me. It was like we were having a standoff. Then, finally, the cops got there. When they did, the man tried to run for the other exit. The police told him to come back, but when he didn't listen to orders, they ran after him. The man ran out into the parking lot and apparently went around the building. Eventually, he was caught by the cops. The man ended up having several illegal drugs on him and was arrested. He was also banned from our McDonald's forever, and I haven't seen him since. For a little background, when I was a young woman about 10 years ago, I worked at a Walmart for a few months. I worked as a cashier and was just 20 years old, working during the summer when I was back home from college. The Walmart was not far from where I lived, and they were always hiring with it being a large store and whatnot. So after getting the job, things went well for a while. Then, one time, this man came to my checkout. He looked young, but probably a few years older than me. Overall, I would not say that he was ugly, but I will say that he was not very attractive. When he was at my checkout, I was scanning his items that he was buying, and he told me that I was beautiful. I was happy to get a compliment and told him thanks. He then asked me what my Instagram was. I don't know why, but for some reason, I gave it to him. Looking back, I could have just said that I didn't have one or that I didn't want to give it out. But I told him it, and he took out his phone right then and there, which I didn't expect. He typed it in, found my profile, and then followed me and showed me that he did. It seemed a little bit strange, but I just played it off and said thanks. He then asked me if I had a boyfriend. I told him no, but I'm not really looking for anything at all right now. He said that he understood, and I felt a little better. There was an awkward silence, and I quickly finished scanning his items. I saw him looking at his phone, and I realized that he was on my Instagram page still. Quickly enough, though, he paid, and I told him to have a nice day. When he left, he said bye, and I thought that I would not see him again. But I was wrong. Literally the next day, the guy sent me a message on Instagram. He said hi, and I did respond to him saying hi back. He started a conversation with me, and I didn't know what to think about it. Pretty quickly, though, he asked to hang out, and I said no. He continued to message me, so I just ignored him. To that point, he had not done anything that creepy yet. I'm not going to make a guy seem like a creep just for shooting his shot with me. But after that is when things got real bad. He started messaging me almost non-stop. When I stopped replying, he just continued sending me messages. I was so tired of seeing the notifications. In 2 days, he sent me over 30 messages. Most of them were just saying stuff like, hey, or why aren't you responding? Finally, I sent him one final message, saying that I was sorry but I didn't want to hang out or talk with him anymore, and to please leave me alone. He did not, though. He just kept sending me even more messages. So at that point, I blocked him. But this didn't stop the young man. He made another fake Instagram account and started messaging me there. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was the same guy, so I blocked that account as well. He didn't message me after that. But a few days later, I got word from some of my friends that he was messaging them on Instagram. Apparently, he saw who some of my friends were through my Instagram page, so he followed a few of them and then started asking them questions about me. He claimed that he was a good friend of mine, and so a few of them contacted me about it because he seemed strange. I was angry and told my friends to block him and that he wouldn't leave me alone. After this, I thought the whole ordeal was finally over. Except, one night during the next week, I was working another shift at Walmart. As I was at my checkout, I was kept pretty busy for most of the time. But at one point when things quieted down, I looked around and observed the same man there. He was sitting down on a bench closer to the exit doors. He was just sitting there and watching me. When I noticed him, he didn't wave or anything. He just stared intently. It was really creepy, and I looked away at once. I tried to distract myself, and soon enough, some more customers came into my check lane. But when I looked back and he was still there, I had enough. I left my check lane and found my boss, who I told about the whole situation. He said that he would go talk to the guy. Now, I don't know what my boss was planning to say or do. I'm not sure if he had the authority to kick the guy out of the store or anything. I guess he did if he was a manager, but as soon as my boss walked over and approached the man, the guy quickly got up and left. They didn't even have a conversation. I was glad to see him gone and hoped that he would not come back. I worked the rest of my shift and it went well. I got off sometime that night at maybe 9 or 10 o'clock. However, after clocking out, I left the store and started walking through the parking lot to my car. It was very quiet now. I saw one guy kind of walking around the lot. I realized it was the same guy. He was not standing by my car, but I hoped that he wouldn't notice me. I turned and started walking to another row of cars closer to mine. But then he did notice me. I saw him start walking in my direction. I bolted for my car and ran there. I was able to make it, but the guy reached the car right after I did. I went inside and locked the doors, and he started knocking on my window. I didn't waste any time and just drove away. After that, I actually called my boss and told him about the guy to make him aware of the situation, because if this were to continue, I would not feel safe coming to work anymore. Thankfully, I was off for a few days. When I returned to work, I was told that the guy was banned from the Walmart. Apparently, he showed up again, I guess to look for me, but he didn't buy anything and just walked around. Based on him following me to my car, the manager trespassed him from the store. I think that was enough for him to finally leave me alone once and for all, because I never saw him again after that. I only worked at the Walmart for about another month though. Looking back, it was a pretty creepy experience. This happened a few years ago now, but I won't forget it. I was with my girlfriend and we were driving back. It was pretty late, but I had some caffeine, so I was good to drive. However, not long into the drive, we were both very hungry, and we were driving kind of out in the middle of nowhere. We saw this McDonald's sign sort of behind some trees and a ways off the road, so we took the next exit. Then we followed some really quiet and dark roads until we reached the McDonald's. Now, it's worth mentioning that the light that we saw for McDonald's was not lit up. It was just a tall M sign, but those are not always lit up, and sometimes the place is still open. But when we got to the McDonald's, we couldn't really tell if it was open or not. It looked like there was some light on inside, but there were absolutely no cars in the parking lot at all. At least not on the side of the building where we went. There could have been some around back. It just seemed really quiet and almost deserted. Nearby was really nothing else other than a gas station a ways down the road, I think. But we were very hungry, so we decided to park and see if it was open anyways. So we parked the car, got out, and walked up to the doors. Surprisingly to me, the doors were unlocked and we went inside. However, once we were in, we walked up to the counter and nobody was there. Not only that, but there was really nothing behind the counter at all. It became clear that the restaurant was not open and it appeared to be abandoned. There were still all the tables and chairs inside the restaurant, but they were very old and outdated. The whole place looked like it was straight out of the 90s. Behind the counter though was where you could really tell that things were missing. The strangest part was that there was a light on near the counter. In our time inside, my girlfriend and I were talking with each other about how weird it was. We soon thought that maybe they were going to do construction or something like that, and that's possibly why the place was left unlocked and a light was on. But we didn't hear any noises at all when we were inside, until we were sort of at the back corner of the dining room area. We had been inside for maybe 2 or 3 minutes and were just looking around because we found it interesting how the place looked deserted and was so outdated. As we were just admiring about how it looked untouched for years, we suddenly heard somebody say loud and clear from near the counter, "Can I take your order?" We both looked in that direction at once, but we could not see right to that spot because of where we were. I felt nervous and we both walked over there. However, when we got within sight of the counter, we saw no one. We walked all the way up to it and nobody was there at all. We asked who was there but got no answer. However, we did hear somebody walking back in the kitchen area out of sight. I didn't want to stay any longer. We both just walked out and left. We drove to a gas station some ways down the highway instead. Then we went back home. After that, I tried to look up the McDonald's to see if I could find any information on it. However, I could not find anything. I still don't know who was in there or what the story was with that McDonald's. One night after work, I went to McDonald's. I was very hungry and every other place was closed. It was after 10 p.m., so the options for food were very slim, at least in the area that I live. I went to the McDonald's closer to my work, but on the way home. I pulled into the parking lot, walked in, and ordered at one of the screens. Then I waited for a little while. There were a couple of other people inside, but not many. I really didn't pay them much attention though. As I waited for my order, I just went on my phone. Soon enough, my order was called and I got it and then left. I walked to my car, got in, and started to drive home. When I pulled out onto the road, this truck pulled out from the McDonald's right behind me. Then it started to follow me, and by this point where we were basically the only two cars on the road. I wouldn't have been that suspicious at first, but then the truck turned where I did and it started honking. I hadn't done anything wrong, and I was wondering why the truck was honking at me. I slowed down and moved to the right side of the road. I thought that maybe the truck wanted to pass me, but when I did, he made no attempt to get by. Then he started flashing his brights on and off. Clearly this guy was really trying to get my attention or had a big problem with me. I pulled over to the side of the road completely and stopped. When I did, the truck went forward going past me, but then went right in front of me and stopped. He stopped in a way where he was basically cutting me off and blocking my path. It was really aggressive. Then the driver's door opened and this man walked out. I recognized him and realized that he was one of the people that was inside the McDonald's. I'm not sure how I noticed so fast because I hadn't really paid much attention to the people in there. But nevertheless I did, and he was now walking towards my car. It seemed like the guy was up to no good and I felt like I needed to get out of there. So as soon as the man quickly approached my driver's door, I put the car into reverse. Then I backed up down the side of the road and the guy quickly went back over to his truck. I made a U-turn and now started going the opposite way down the road. When I did, the man was able to get back to his truck fast enough and started to follow me again. As I was driving the other way on the road now, he quickly caught back up to me. I wasn't sure where to go, and there was not a whole lot around in the general area. Plus, it was late at night, which did not help the matter. As I drove down that road, I just decided to go back to the McDonald's. It was a public place with other people, so it felt a little bit safer. When I saw it again, I pulled into the parking lot. Then I quickly parked. The man in the truck also drove to the McDonald's and parked. I got out of my car quickly and walked back inside as the truck was parking. When I got into the McDonald's, I realized that the man did not get out of his truck. He was still inside it, waiting for me to leave probably, but I was not going to. I went and sat down in the McDonald's and then just waited. I looked out the window watching the guy's truck. I sat there for probably 20 or 30 minutes. Then, finally, I saw the truck drive away. After it left, I left, and I was able to drive home finally. I made it back safe, but I never found out why that guy was following me. Clearly, he really wanted something with me, but I have no idea what. I used to work at Walmart years ago. It was from 2014 to 2016, and when I worked there, I was a cashier. It was one of the first jobs that I ever had, and looking back, I can't believe that I worked there for so long. But overall, I didn't mind it too much. During a time period when I worked there, I would often work really late at night. I would start sometime in the afternoon and would get off at like 11 p.m. or so. I remember that one time I was working one of these late night shifts, and it was very quiet. There were only a few people inside the store shopping. I hadn't had a customer check out in a while in my checkout, and I was just counting down the minutes until I was off. By that point in the night, there were probably only like 3 checkouts open, with me being one of them. So I remember that finally a man came to my checkout. He was just buying one thing, which was an energy drink or something like that. I remember that he was wearing a sweatshirt and cargo pants with a lot of pockets. The guy put the energy drink down in front of me, and when he did, I could see other things in his pockets. All his pockets from his pants to his sweater looked filled with stuff, and I could see in his sweater pocket there was some stuff that we sold. As I was scanning the energy drink, I observed the items in the guy's pockets. I told the guy that I could scan the stuff in his pockets as well. Clearly, the guy was trying to shoplift, but at the time, for some reason, I thought that the guy was just storing items in his pockets instead of using a shopping cart. Maybe I was just tired from a long day, or maybe I was just young and dumb, but the thought of him trying to shoplift wasn't even going through my mind. I really thought that he was just storing the items in his pockets to bring to the checkouts. When I said this, the man said, "What are you talking about?" I pointed to his pockets. When I did, he gave me a dirty look. Then he just turned around and then walked the other way back into the store. I was confused and did not know where he was going, but he was very quickly out of my sight. To me, it just seemed like a bizarre encounter. After a few minutes of thinking about it, I realized that he was shoplifting. I felt stupid for not knowing that sooner, but I was glad that I had stopped him, or at least seemed to. I guessed that it was possible he was trying to go to another exit to steal there, but I looked around and didn't notice the guy. I stayed at my checkout and didn't get any more customers. Then, like 10 minutes later, the guy was back. This time, he did not have anything in his pockets except for one thing. At least, that's all that I could see. I could tell that there was something in one of the pockets, and the guy walked right up to me, but he didn't have any items with him at all. Right away, he told me that he had a gun, and for me to give him all the money in the cash register. He then moved what was in his right pocket without taking it out. It did look like the outline of a gun, but I could only see the outline in his pocket. I was kind of in shock, I guess. I just opened up the cash register and got out all the cash and gave it to him. I asked him if he wanted the coins too, but he said no. There really wasn't that much cash, maybe about $150 or so. Then after he took it, he quickly started walking away and towards the exits. When he did, I saw him take out of his pocket the gun. When I saw it, I realized it was just a toy Nerf gun and one of the small ones. He set it down on a random check lane as he was walking out. Then he walked extremely fast to the exit doors and left. I was glad that the gun was not real, but I also felt stupid for falling for it. Once he was gone, I decided that I should report it, so I told my manager. He ended up calling the cops. They came out and investigated and asked me questions. Then I was able to go home for the night, and I was told that they would check the cameras. I found out like a week later or so that the man was caught. I didn't hear anything more about it, but that was the craziest thing that ever happened when I worked there. Many years ago, I worked at McDonald's for a few months. This was way back when I had recently graduated from high school and was attending a local junior college. I was living with my parents and driving to and from school as well as work. We lived in kind of a small town. It was quiet and calm, and not too many crazy things happened. McDonald's was one of the few businesses that we did have in our town. When I worked there, mostly I would be behind the counter taking people's orders, and usually I would work a shift in the afternoon until late at night. The McDonald's was open for 24 hours back then that I worked at, but I would get off of work at 11 because I was in school, and we didn't need quite as many people working in the overnight hours. The McDonald's never really got that busy. We would get customers at the busy hours, but I don't recall it ever being super crazy. After I worked the job for a few months, I was in a routine of work. I would work a few nights a week, typically getting off at 11. At that time, it would usually be very quiet. When I got off of work, I started to notice this one car in the parking lot with the engine always running and the lights on. It was a 4-door sedan, maybe 15 years old or so, nothing really standing out about it. I couldn't tell who was driving, but never really looked that hard. I just remember leaving for work a few times and seeing it each time. It wasn't a coworker because I would have known who it was. At one time, I sat in my car and texted a few people before leaving, so I was there for a few minutes. The driver never got out or anything. At times, I would get out a little early at maybe 10:45 and the car would be there. Or if I stayed a little late till like 11:15, the car was also there. It was there every time that I got off of work for like 2 weeks in a row. It was something that I always forgot about though. I would only really remember or think about it when I got off of work and noticed it again. I was curious and it seemed sort of odd, but then I would just drive home and forget about it. I thought maybe it was somebody just on a break at their job that was maybe not far away. Who knows? But then, one time, the car was there like normal. When I left for work though, the car followed me. It drove the whole way back home to my parents' house, which was like 10 minutes, but a few streets before mine, it turned off. It freaked me out a little, but it didn't follow me all the way home. Then, like the next 3 or 4 times that I got off of work, the same exact thing happened. No matter when I left, the car would leave right after me, follow me for most of the way, and then turn at the same spot before my house. I told myself maybe this person just lives sort of by me, but why would they always leave right after me? It was creeping me out quite a bit. Then, one night, I got off like usual. It was around 11 p.m. I left the McDonald's and walked out to my car. This time, I saw the creepy car was parked right next to mine. Normally, it was parked at least 5 spaces away and in the same general spot. I wouldn't always park in the exact same place either, because when I would arrive at work, sometimes the McDonald's would be busy. But this was the same general area. This car was always at least a few spaces away from me and had never been next to me. But tonight, it was parked right there, and this freaked me out even more. Still, I tried to ignore it. I got into my car and didn't look at the other one. Then I started the engine. After that, I drove away. Right when I did, the car left too. It followed me all the way back. However, this time, it did not turn at its usual place. It followed me all the way to my parents' house. When I arrived back, I pulled onto the side of the road out front. I was afraid to pull into the driveway knowing that it would take longer. I just parked, got out, and sprinted for the house. I ran inside and made it. When I looked back, the car was pulling over too, but at least nobody was getting out. I instantly found my parents and told my dad about it. He went over to the front door and the car was now parked out front of our house. My dad walked right outside towards the car. However, before he got halfway to it, the car very quickly drove away. The next time that I worked was several nights later. When I got to work that night, I brought it up to a few coworkers. I asked them if they had any idea who drove that car. None of them had any clue as to what I was talking about though. That night when I was working behind the counter at probably about 10 p.m., things were very quiet. Nobody was in the restaurant until I saw the doors open and a man walked in. From what I remember, he looked to be in his 40s, was somewhat short but large, and had a slight beard and was balding. He walked up to me and I got ready to take his order. However, when I asked how I could help him, he just said, "Tell your dad that he's a coward." Then he turned around and calmly walked away. He left the McDonald's, and at first I was so confused that I didn't say anything. Then, after he had left, I realized that it had to be the guy from the car. I quickly went to the back and told a coworker. We went out into the parking lot and just barely saw the guy driving away. It was the same car. My manager heard about the whole thing and she let me leave early. I didn't see the car at all. After that, I was given 2 weeks off. When I returned to work, the car never showed up again. I also never saw it at my house either. That's something that still gives me the creeps every time I think back to it.
This happened when I was in high school. I must have been a junior or senior at the time. We had just moved to a different city away from family. The area and neighborhood itself wasn't bad, but this part of town really had a reputation for having the most crime, especially catalytic converter thefts. Think of a city that's divided into north and south. We lived in the south side of the city. Some background information that's important. My dad would regularly leave the country for weeks or months at a time and go stay in his country of origin to get away from the stress of the city life, so he was usually always gone, which meant that it was just my mom, my brother, and I. My brother would always go out and was really hardly ever home, so it would mostly just be me and my mom home. I should add that I'm also a female. One thing to note is that my brother has always had this habit of buying trucks, modifying them, and then eventually selling them once he got bored of them. When this story happened, he had a lifted white Chevy Silverado and another lifted truck. I should also mention that the layout of my house is important in this story. The houses in this neighborhood all have the same base layout, but in different variations. My house is basically shaped like a lowercase n, with our front door being down this semi-long hall and our rooms being at the front of the house. Next to our house is a long driveway where half is behind a gate that locks from the inside while the rest of our driveway is exposed. The part of the driveway that is behind the gate is right next to my parents' room. My parents have 2 windows in the corner of their rooms, one looking out to the street and were looking out to the driveway behind the gate. Our house had a partial chain link fence that only covered the front yard but didn't actually enclose it, which meant people could just walk right in through my driveway and across the front yard to get to our house. My dad thought it was pointless to add a proper fence all around the yard since he wanted the yard to also be used as parking, and adding a driveway gate to the front was too much work, as it would require us to get out of our cars to open and close it. Anyways, sorry for the long background information, but I thought it was important to add. Now back to the story. This happened when my dad was out of the country, so it was just me and my mom at home since my brother went out for that evening. My brother had left in his other truck, so the white Chevy was behind the driveway gate. My mom and I were on our own rooms just scrolling through our phones. I was on my phone just doom scrolling when I saw that my mom was calling me. My parents' room is right next to mine, so I thought it was odd that she was calling me instead of just coming over to my room. I answered, and my mom then told me in a quiet voice to come to her room because she had heard a guy talking outside her window and could see him outside. I got up and walked into her room, but I didn't see the guy outside her window. She told me that he had left on a bike, but that she had heard him talking to himself and peering into the driveway where my brother kept his truck. She wasn't sure if he was just some random guy that was confused and wandering into people's houses while talking to himself, or if this was someone that wanted to steal my brother's truck and was communicating with someone else that we couldn't see. I ended up going back to my room since it looked like the guy had left. Maybe about 10 minutes later, my mom lets me know that the guy is back and that he's talking to himself or someone else, but can't make out what he's saying. I go into her room, and that's when I see the silhouette of the guy she's talking about. I can't really make out what he's saying, but in the time I'm trying to process who this guy is and what he's saying, he walks off. It's at this point that my mom calls my brother and tells him what's going on. My brother then comes home, and my mom tells him the whole story of the weird dude outside in the driveway. Since my brother came home, I thought he was planning on staying home for the whole night since it's just my mom and I alone. Nope. My brother just decides to give me a quick lesson on how to use a pistol in case I need to use it, and then he leaves again. Now luckily, the guy didn't come back after that, and nothing happened for the rest of the night. We didn't call the police because even though he was technically in our driveway trespassing, we didn't hear him breaking in. And we just assumed he was just some guy on drugs that was just wandering around on his bike and talking to himself. Though I wouldn't be surprised if he was there to steal from the truck. I'm not sure if my brother coming home scared him or what, but either way, I'm really glad nothing else happened.
This happened one time when I was working at Walmart years ago. I don't work there anymore, and I only worked there for about a year. I mostly worked in the parking lot pushing carts, but I also stocked shelves at times occasionally as well. When I worked there, I got to know a decent amount of the other coworkers. I was pretty friendly and had some work friends there, which was nice to have. Some of the workers were good, and others not so much, but one in particular was super lazy. I think anyone who's ever had a job can relate to having a coworker like this. There was a guy named Austin, and he was always slacking off. He would literally clock in and then go straight to the back room and just hide and go on his phone for 8 hours. He would only be seen again if he was specifically called to do a task or if it was time to clock out. He would actually do work like 1 in every 5 shifts. It made me so mad, but I wasn't going to report him or anything because I'm not a rat. And at Walmarts, they have so many employees that it's possible for some of the employees to go unnoticed for hours, at least at some locations. It really depends on the management and how the store is ran there, I guess. And it was weird because my managers there were actually kind of strict, but for whatever reason they either didn't catch on to Austin or just didn't care. Anyways, one day I saw that Austin was working with me and I rolled my eyes. That meant more work for me. I saw him clocking in and then didn't see him for like 3 hours, which was expected. After that, I continued with my work. A while later though, I had to go to the back room of the store to get something. When I was back there, I was walking through a really quiet area. In the back room, it's pretty much how you would expect. There's lots of crates and boxes and products yet to hit the floor. There's also forklifts and other equipment as well as a few other rooms. There was one spot in particular where it kind of went around a corner. As I was back there, I saw around the corner part a person sitting down. I could only see part of their arm and realized that it was Austin. I ignored him and kept going. I thought about maybe saying something, but I didn't think it was worth it, so I just kept working. Like an hour later, I had to go back there again. I walked by the same spot and saw Austin still there. This time, I stopped and looked at him. I was just ticked off that he hadn't moved the whole hour. I wanted to call him out. But then, as I stood there, only seeing his arm, he got up. That's when I realized that it wasn't actually Austin. It was some random guy. He did not work at the Walmart and was not supposed to be back there. He looked at me for like a second, and then walked farther around the corner quickly and out of my sight. After seeing that, I just walked away. I didn't feel like telling some guy that he couldn't be back there and had to leave the store. I was more so just glad that it wasn't Austin slacking off, so I left the area and went back to work again. I continued working for the next few hours. Now I had to work past closing time that night, so I would get off shortly after the store would close. I remember that when I was finally about off, the store was closed, and I saw Austin come to the front and clock out a few minutes early. On the other hand, I was going to actually finish my work. I was walking in the back room again and saw the same man once more. This was crazy this time, because it was hours after the previous time that I had seen him. I had no idea that he was still back there, and I didn't think that he would be. This time when I saw him though, he was not in the same place. He was not really hiding, but far away almost at the end of the sort of long hallway that we were in the back room area. Nobody else was around at all. I was going to kind of just ignore the man once again. I would tell someone else that he was back there once I left. But as I stood still back there, I saw the guy start to walk in my direction, and he was walking pretty fast too. I didn't know why, but he didn't say anything. Soon he started running and was going straight for me. The only thing that I could think to do was to turn around and run away, so I went to the opposite direction until I made it back to the door that went into the main store area. When I got back out, I quickly ran to find the nearest coworker. The man did not emerge from the back. I told my coworkers what was going on. When the word got around to one of the store managers, the cops got called. I was done with work, so I left. But I found out later on that the cops arrested the guy. He had been in the back for hours, and he got in through a back door which was left open. Those doors were never supposed to be left open. It is my theory that Austin left the door open. He was probably hiding in the back at the other end of the store. I worked there for another few months before quitting. Austin quit before I did though. I remember him writing in our group chat that he was happy to announce that he was getting a job at our rival Target out of spite. He went on to say a bunch of bad things about our store and management. He's one to talk because he literally got away with being the laziest worker of all time. And when he quit, he didn't even put in his 2 weeks notice. He just stopped showing up. But that was my craziest experience working at Walmart. A few years ago, I was on a road trip with my husband. We were driving across the country and doing a lot of sightseeing and visiting parks. So one time when we were in the middle of the road trip, we left a hotel to hit the road. The hotel that we were staying at did not have a breakfast, so we stopped at the McDonald's in town. When we got there, it was very busy. My husband waited in the car and I went to get the food. A lot of other people were standing around inside the McDonald's. I ordered and then waited amongst the other people. As I looked around, I noticed a man across the room. He was standing kind of far away, but he appeared to be looking in my direction, and he started making these weird and creepy faces. I wasn't sure at first if something was wrong with him. It appeared as though he was intensely staring at me, and going from a creepy grin to a mad face. Then he would go back to a straight face. I stopped looking at him because it was weird. When I looked back, he was still doing it. I just kept waiting. After some time, I noticed that the man was starting to walk very slowly closer and closer in my direction. It was like he was moving a foot or two closer, just standing there, and then moving a little bit closer a few seconds later. He soon became just about 20 feet away from me. At last, though, my order was called. I walked up to the counter and picked it up, and then started walking to the exits. I got out of there and was glad to be away from the guy. I went back to the car with my husband, and we continued with our road trip. I told him about the guy, and we laughed it off given the fact that he didn't really do anything. We drove pretty much all day. We did stop a few times to see some sights and to get food again as well as gas, but none of our detours and stops really took that long. We drove until nighttime when we were tired, and then we stopped to get another hotel. This one was a pretty cheap place. We didn't mind much though. In fact, it was a motel. However, we just parked, got the room, and then went inside. After going into our room, I remember that I was looking out the window. It had a view of mostly just the parking lot. When I did, I saw the same guy from before. He was walking in the parking lot kind of towards the main offices of the motel. As I was looking out the window, at first the man was not looking in my direction, but he then turned his head towards me and saw me. When he noticed me, he went back to his famous creepy smile. I quickly looked away. I could not believe it. We were hundreds of miles away from the McDonald's where I saw him earlier that morning. How was he here, and why was he here? We looked out of the window, but now he was gone and out of sight. It was really crazy. After that, we just tried to forget about it. We watched TV until we got tired. But really late at night, there was a knock on the door. My husband went over and looked through the peephole. It was the same guy. He didn't stay there long though, walking away after about 30 seconds. After that, he didn't come back. We left early the next morning and didn't see the guy at all. We didn't see him for the rest of the trip. But it was so weird. Did that guy follow us all the way there? I mean, it was hundreds of miles. If not, that's one of the craziest coincidences ever.
Every cop sees something that they'll never forget. Something that will stick with them for the rest of their life. What I'm about to describe to you is that story for me. This is the most disturbing thing I've ever witnessed. When I turned 21, I joined the police force in a remote town that I won't name. The department needed new officers, and I was a young father who needed the money, so the timing was perfect. Because I was a rookie, they assigned me to the night shift. It ran from 6 at night to 6 in the morning. The guys at the gas station sometimes teased me about my hours, saying that I always worked the crummiest shifts. I actually didn't mind them. I've always been a night owl. The guys even called me Nighthawk, and honestly, I kind of like that. Besides busting people for speeding and pulling over the occasional drunk, I spent most nights sitting back listening to podcasts. In a weird way, it was kind of relaxing. After a year in the department, something happened one night that changed everything. A severe thunderstorm rolled into town and caused major power outages. Torrential downpour flooded most of the major roads. To be in the best position possible when accident reports came in, I parked my cruiser in a parking lot in the middle of town. At 2 a.m., our dispatcher Claire radioed in. She reported that someone who sounded like an adult male claimed to have been kidnapped. They told her they were held captive inside someone's home. Then the call ended. When she redialed, the caller didn't answer. My cruiser had a built-in computer display that showed all the call details. Based on the address, I was about 10 minutes away, so I was probably the closest officer. I radioed in and I told her I'd respond. I also requested backup. Another new officer named Chris chimed in and said he'd be at the location in 5. Claire clicked on her radio but hesitated for a few seconds over the static. Then she said that the caller sounded like they were altering their voice in some way, possibly through digital means to make themselves sound like a child. She used the specific phrase, like a young girl. She concluded that officers should proceed with extreme caution. All of us were pretty close to the station, so we really felt nervous for one another during high-risk cases like these. I radioed back and said, 10-4, and then drove to the scene. When I turned into the neighborhood, I saw that every single street lamp was out. The entire block had lost power. That meant it would have low visibility into the home we were investigating, which put us in even greater danger. I followed my GPS to the end of the street where the house was, and I saw that Chris had already beaten me. His cruiser was idling in front of the house. I pulled up next to him and rolled down my window. Chris then commented on the home's poor condition. I glanced ahead, taking it in for myself. The grass was knee-high. Overgrown bushes blocked out the windows. The roof was dented in several areas and had a ton of missing shingles. It looked completely abandoned. This sent off alarm bells in my head. You can gather a lot about someone's mental state by how they treat their living space. I told Chris I'd take the lead. We both stepped out of our cruisers into the pouring rain, opened our umbrellas, and followed a waterlogged path up to the door. Chris clicked on his flashlight. Whenever a second officer like Chris is present during an investigation, their entire job is to protect the leading officer by monitoring the suspect's body language. If the suspect makes a move on the cop that's interrogating them, they neutralize the threat. Chris made the perfect backup because he was both observant and calm under pressure. This allowed me to focus solely on the suspect's story and if I was hearing the truth. When we reached the door, I rang the bell. Then we stood there listening for movement inside. Rain pounded against our backs. After a few seconds, footsteps shuffled up to the door. Then they paused. Whoever was on the other side stood completely still, just waiting. A strange feeling came over me that we were being watched. Slowly, my gaze drifted over to the peephole. As soon as I made eye contact, a distorted shape moved back, like whoever was watching us had pulled their head away. "If you're in there," I said, "we'd like to ask you a few questions. Open up, please." They froze again as if they were thinking about what to do next. Then the lock started turning. The door creaked open, but only by a foot. From the darkness, a man peeked out of the crack. He looked like he was in his early 30s. He was overweight, balding, and wore thick-brimmed glasses. I took a single look into his eyes and sensed that he was hiding something. I informed him that we'd received a call from his address of someone claiming to have been kidnapped. The man acted confused. He apologized and told us,
"It must have been a pocket dial."
I asked him if it was a pocket dial, then how could he explain the voice on the phone call? For a split second, the man averted his gaze, then said that he didn't know anything about a voice. I asked him if there was anyone else in the house, and he said he lived alone. Then I told him that for safety reasons we needed to have a look inside.
"Not without a warrant,"
he said. These days a warrant can be obtained in minutes. I went back to my cruiser, called dispatch, and requested communication with the on-call magistrate. 5 minutes later, Claire came back on the radio and told me the judge approved a telephonic warrant and emailed it. We were clear to enter. I showed the warrant to the man. He reluctantly pulled the door open, and I could see that his hands were visibly shaking. I clicked on my own flashlight and stepped inside. A putrid smell immediately hit me. I scanned around to find the source and saw a hallway straight ahead and a room directly to my right. I shined my light into the room and saw what looked like a living room. It was absolutely disgusting. Piles of clothes and stacks of dirty dishes were spread all across the carpet. Cockroaches crawled all over them. A couch that looked like it was pulled off the side of the road sat at an angle against the wall. This man obviously used this room as his living space. I'd seen these sorts of living conditions in drug cases before. When I turned to look back at the man, he shifted uncomfortably. I made a mental note to check for paraphernalia once I'd confirmed the house was safe. Then I stepped toward the hallway. My foot struck something. I looked down. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a pink Barbie doll playhouse that I knew I'd seen before. I thought about it, and I realized I'd bought this exact set for my daughter just last year for Christmas. I asked the man if he had kids. He said no, but explained to us that sometimes his nieces came over, so he kept a few toys around for them. Chris and I exchanged a look. No mother in their right mind would allow children into this environment. I told him that this was his last chance to tell me if anyone else was in the house. He assured me there wasn't. I started down the hallway, and the man followed, saying that nothing was down there. Chris yanked him back by his arm and ordered him to stay put. The hallway had an open room on either side and a closed door at the end, which was probably the basement. I peeked inside the first bedroom. Scanning from left to right, I saw more children's toys and even items like diapers scattered across the floor. In the corner, the dark shape of a person was hunched over. I drew my weapon, only to realize that it was a doll sagging its head down in a rocking chair. The shock of that visual made my heart pound. I leaned against the doorframe and steadied my breathing. Chris asked me what I had seen. Before I could respond, I had started studying the doll. It was the largest one I'd ever seen. Every bit as big as a person, and the man had dressed it in women's clothing. On the bed beside it, ladies' blouses, jeans, and lingerie were folded into neat piles. Each pile was separated by a color. Meanwhile, the rest of the house was pigsty. What was happening in this room felt wrong on so many different levels. "All clear," I told Chris. I moved further down the hall and glanced into the second bedroom. This one was empty. I reached the final door at the end of the hall, when from behind me the man called and asked if I'd like to see the upstairs instead. I told him, yes. But first, I was going to see the basement. The man said again that there was nothing down there. I heard Chris tell the man to stay chill, which meant he was probably trying to follow me down the hall. The closer I moved into this part of the house, the more agitated he became. I reached for the handle, twisted the knob, and pushed the door open. It squealed on its hinges. A set of wooden steps descended into a pitch-black room. I shined my light down. I could only see the area that surrounded the landing. It looked equally as messy as the upstairs. From deep inside the room, in an area I couldn't see, something rattled. I told Chris that I heard movement. The man responded again, apologizing to me and Chris over and over again. Even though it was the last thing I wanted to do, I had no choice. The man was lying to us. Someone was down there. I headed down the staircase. Each step creaked under my weight. The rattling noise from inside the room grew louder. Behind me, the man repeatedly begged us to stop looking around. I neared the landing and swept my flashlight across the stacks of boxes. No one appeared in my line of sight. Across the room, there was another door. The noise was coming from up there. I drew my weapon. I commanded whoever was inside to come out slowly with their hands up. Whoever was inside stopped moving. I shouted the same command a second time. The door remained shut. I crossed the room, sliding between boxes and old furniture that blocked the way. My sights were trained on the door. When I stood within several feet, I paused, listening. Whoever was inside also remained perfectly still. My anxiety ticked up with each second. So many things could go wrong in this situation. I moved to the side of the door frame in case they were armed and tried to fire through the door. I reached for the knob, grabbed on, and twisted. Then I swung the door open. I was still hidden to the side of the frame. If anything besides empty hands emerged, I would have to use deadly force. After several agonizing moments, nothing came. I said a quick prayer and then aimed my weapon right into the room. What I saw, I really can't go into detail on. But basically, this is what happened. A man in his 40s was being held captive in that basement. He was a father of 3 and a respected member of the community. Months after he went missing, everyone including his own family assumed he was dead. After 2 years in captivity, he finally got the chance to escape. Earlier in the night, before we arrived, the homeowner brought the victim's dinner down and made the mistake of leaving his phone behind. The victim managed to activate Siri and call 911. When we arrived on scene, the victim had already been confined in a way that prevented him from calling upstairs or making any kind of substantial noise. Then, when I ordered him to come out, he froze in fear, not because he couldn't obey my command, but because he didn't want me to use lethal force, thinking that he was a threat. Once I opened the door and found him, we arrested the homeowner on the spot and then took the victim to the hospital for immediate treatment. I feel incredibly lucky that no one was harmed and that we could reunite this poor man with his family. But the most disturbing detail, which has haunted me every day since, is how my dispatcher described the voice of the man who made the call. Why was he speaking like a child? The only explanation that really makes sense is that this man was forced to speak in that young tone of a voice for so long that even when he called the station, that's the only way he could communicate. And if he was forced to do that, what else inside that house was he forced to do? These are the questions that keep me up at night.
I went to Walmart one night many years ago. This was back when Walmarts used to be open 24 hours. It was always interesting to go to Walmart in the middle of the night. The store would usually be very quiet. Sometimes you would see the employees stocking the shelves. Other times you would see some of the craziest customers. And other times it would be very quiet and peaceful. I've always been a night owl and I often used to work late as well. On this night I had worked sort of late, but I went back to my apartment after work and then decided to go out shopping to the nearby Walmart. It was like a 5-minute drive from my apartment, and I left to go there probably a little after midnight. But when I needed to do a little shopping, I enjoyed going so late. There would be no traffic on the roads and hardly any traffic in the store as well. So I remember that when I got to the Walmart, I parked kind of in the far back of the parking lot. I walked inside the store and started shopping. I didn't need to get that much stuff, and I think I just had a shopping basket and not a cart. Mostly, I was in the grocery department of the store getting food that I needed. When I was inside the store, I saw only a few other people. Most of them were employees, and I saw a couple of other people that were shopping, but not very many. After being in the store for maybe 10 minutes, I remembered that I heard my cell phone start to ring. I was confused as to why somebody would be calling me so late at night. I took it out of my pocket and answered. When I did, I said hello, but heard nothing on the other end. Then I heard someone breathing. Multiple times I asked who was there, but no one said anything. So at that point, I hung up, thinking that it was probably a wrong number or somebody called me by mistake. I looked at the number and it was not one that I recognized at all. I was a little creeped out from hearing the breathing but nobody speaking at all, but I just carried on with my shopping. But then, surprisingly, like 5 minutes later, that same number called me again. I answered once more and said hello. There was once again silence. I asked who was there but heard nothing. Then they hung up on me. I was even more confused and also creeped out now. I continued my shopping and finished up. Then I went to the front of the store and checked out. When I did not receive any more calls. After checking out, I walked to the exit doors and stepped out into the parking lot. When I did, I could see my car parked a long ways away. I remember that it was a cool and sort of foggy night. When I saw my car, though, I noticed that there was a man standing next to it. He was literally leaning on my car, but facing in the opposite direction, and there were no other cars parked directly around mine, so I didn't know why he was there. The man was wearing dark pants and a hooded sweatshirt, so I couldn't make out any details about him at all. I couldn't see any part of his face with him standing in the opposite direction. I had started to walk to my car, but now stopped just about 20 feet into the parking lot. It seemed really creepy. Then I suddenly heard my phone start to ring in my pocket again. I took it out and looked. It was the same person calling. I answered it again and this time said, "Why do you keep calling me?" There was still no answer. However, I looked to the man that was standing next to my car in the parking lot. I saw that he was now holding a cell phone up to his ear. Was this the guy who was calling me? I asked him, "Are you standing next to my car right now?" When I said this, he did not answer but hung up on me. Then I saw the guy standing by my car put the cell phone back in his pocket. The man then started to turn around and face me. When he did, I saw that he was wearing sunglasses, but I really couldn't make out any other details. He was far away and it was dark out. I was so creeped out that I turned around and walked back inside the Walmart. I just started walking around the store hoping that when I went back out the man would be gone. A short time later, the guy called again. I declined the call and then shut my phone off completely. I started wandering the aisles of Walmart aimlessly, just wondering to myself who that guy was and what was going on. After walking around for like 15 minutes, I was somewhere in the back part of the Walmart near the auto parts area. I came around a random aisle and saw the man now inside the Walmart. He was kind of far away and walking down another aisle. He was still wearing the hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses. I quickly turned the corner of another aisle and was out of sight of the guy. Then I walked to another aisle as fast as I could and started quickly making my way to the front. A short time into that and I just started running. I didn't look back and sprinted to the exit doors. When I got there, I ran out into the parking lot and went for my car. I made it there, got inside, and looked around. I saw the creepy guy just walking out of the Walmart and into the parking lot. Then I quickly drove away. I got home and wasn't followed or anything. I never saw that guy again. I turned my phone back on and saw that he had tried to call multiple times. I blocked his number. But I still have many unanswered questions. How did he get my number and who was he? Had he been following me or stalking me somehow? The whole thing was very strange, but I'm happy that I never saw him again after that.